Good morning. Hi, how are you? The priorities of the planter pass. I'm Mike Schlitt. I'm one of the region managers here at Precision Planting. I'll be joined here by Ryan Howard as well as Tim Schwind. That's right, it takes three of us to focus on the priorities of the planter pass. So I may be a little biased. I'm actually in my 19th year here at Precision Planting. And so as I kind of talk about what precision planting is or who we are, it really comes down to our purpose. What's been our goal? And it's really been the same since I started here. And that is, the first step is to understand and know the yield robbing issues in the field, okay? And then to take that to the field, to the growers to explain, hey, this is what's happened on our farm. This is happening on your farm. But then it's also to help improve the planter pass. Again, that's what we're focused on here. But you've seen how today you're actually seeing sprayers. You've seen us working on combines, seeders. It's a full picture, right? And then to take all of that and then make it to where it's simpler to use. And we can actually simplify that planter process because it is complex. If you've been in the cab, there's a lot going on, right? What do we call that? Jack of all trades, master of none, right? It's a real challenge. And so as we think about how many opportunities do we get with the planter pass to do it right? How many chances do you get? Chances is the right word too, right? You get one chance, right? And really that planter pass is setting the foundation for your yield opportunity, okay? So as we think about it, I am an 80s kid. Anybody else here grow up in the 80s? Yeah, we're in a tough spot, aren't we? I woke up this morning and I said, I am way too young to feel this old. But I'm too old to call myself young too, right? So again, there's a lot of great things that came out of the 80s. One of my favorite things was I grew up with G.I. Joe, okay? Not the dolls, okay? They're action figures. But they also had a show, and that's what I watched. And if you don't remember, basically there were a lot of challenges and things that they had to overcome through that episode. And at the end, they'd always say the same phrase, right? And it was pointed towards kids, right? It was Sergeant Slaughter would be talking and say, and Billy, knowing is half the battle, right? And it's like, hey, that's true even today, right? Understanding what's going on. Again, when I started at Precision Planting, this is typically how we would find the issue. What's the problem with this picture? What can I do about it? Nothing. I'm stuck with this. And so it goes back to the phrase, if knowing is half the battle, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so what we'd do is we'd see this and we would take our meter and run to our local precision planting dealer and have it tested on the stand and make sure it's calibrated and ready to go because there's no way we were going to look at a stand like that again. How many of you walk fields? When you walk your own fields and you see it, it hurts, right? And that causes you to do something about it, kind of like that check engine light. But you have to have a check engine light to know, right? And so until you measure, you really don't know. And so in 2007, that game changed. Finding the issue after the season, now we could actually see it in the cab as it would happen. And so it was like putting a test stand actually on your planter, right? And over the years at Precision Planting, you know, I've been repeatedly asked, you know, what's the first thing you would add to your operation? And while I could say it's a Keaton seed firmer, right? Because that's going to be your highest ROI. But at the end of the day, once you put a 2020 on, you'll know where you're sitting, right? You'll know how things are operating. And so it gives you that confidence in the cab to fix the problems. So as I said, we're going to kind of break this out, this yield potential pyramid here. We're going to focus first on the seeding side, sum up population spacing as well as singulation. So as we think about that, when we first start talking about it, you know, you got to think what actually creates those things, and that is the drive system, right? Ground drive has an air tire, right? There's a certain amount of PSI that goes in that tire, what the ground it's running on, chains, hex shafts. You know, from the factory, hex shafts are not all aligned, and so if it'll actually cause the seeding to speed up and slow down. And so those are things you'll see in the field. And then chains. Chains are a big challenge. You have those on every row. You got main drive chains, right? And so as we think about that, there's a lot of room for error. And so again, having that awareness. So like I said, we brought that 2020 in 2007, and the most common call that I would get, and it was kind of funny, but it wasn't, it was, hey Mike, I just bought your 2020, put it in my cab, and it's wrong. Okay, what are you seeing? And the grower would, and this is almost unanimous every time, the grower would say, well, I'm planting 34,000, but your 2020 monitor is telling me I'm planting 32,000. And I said, oh, well, how do you know you're planting 34,000? And he said, I've been planting 34,000 with this planter for 4 years. Oh, okay. So now I realize, I'm kind of offending him, and I say, hey, let's shine the flashlight at where the issue actually is. It's not me. I'm just the one that's taking the call. And so as I go back, I'm like, all right, when you get done with this pass, what I want you to do is I want you to go check your drive system, and you'll have a driver sprocket and a driven sprocket. And I've got a rate chart here that I can verify where you're set. Let's check it out. Get to the end of the pass, he goes out. I said, how many teeth on the driver, how many teeth on the driven? And you were going, what, 5 miles an hour? Yep. I said, according to this rate chart, you're planting 32,000. He goes, are you telling me for the last 4 years I've been planting 32,000? I said, no, sir. I'm just looking at a rate chart, right? Don't point it at me. But the reality is, what did I just do there? I just validated the information in the cab because that was something new. Like, he knew what population meant, but he hadn't really thought it through where it's created, right? Or where it sets that benchmark. And so as I'm dialing in, what's the cost of that? Anytime we think of that, what's the cost? Like, guys, growers will ask, what's the value of a 2020? Well, it's the value of knowing what's happening. So in this case, 2,000 less seeds. Let's hope all of those turn into ears, right? 2,000 less seeds, 2,000 less plants. Divide that by 140 ears per bushel, roughly about 14 bushel loss, $63 per acre. That's $31,500. And how many years did he say? 4 years. And he just didn't know. He didn't know. The information wasn't in there. What about this? I have a 2020 in the cab. I can see that there's a row that's not planting anymore. So I do a temporary fix. What's your version of temporary? Because 200 acres, I'm not sure that's still temporary anymore. I think he thinks that's his solution, okay? But again, you have to know. You have to be aware. So the next step that we would see growers would be changing their ground drive system to a hydraulic drive. Well, guess what? The hydraulic drive system still uses 95% of the main components that we would find failure in. It took us till 2013 before we solved that and said, hey, we're never going to solve these, the amount of maintenance that you have to do every year. So we just have to get away from it. We have to bypass it completely. So we came out with V-Drive, right, where we're actually, our drive system is now on the V-set meter. Okay, and it's running it on the meter row by row. Bypasses all of that, right? So it's a simplified solution. Okay, what about turns and curves with your traditional drive system? From the inside to the outside, I mean, you can see a 3x swing. Is there a 3x swing on bushels in yield? If there was, maybe that'd be okay. But that's where spacing matters, right? So Dr. Nielsen out at Purdue University across 10 years and 200 fields looked in and calculated what the value of spacing is. And so 24% of the fields were more than 6 inches off target. Okay, at that point, I could say I'd take a coffee can full of corn and just dribble it out there because it doesn't matter. 60% was 3 to 6 inches off target. Only 16% were within that 3 inch. And so 2.5 bushel loss per 1 inch outside of that standard deviation. Okay, so spacing matters, right? And so where does this spacing error, where do those occur? Well, you've got where the meter releases the seed, right? Once that meter hands off that seed into the seed tube, we have a gravity drop. How do we control that at that point? By giving it a good ride, a smooth, consistent ride. But highly, it's impacted by tillage, field conditions, rocks, speed, right? And then that's what you see. Once you have emergence, you can see that's what you get dealt. And that's the cause, right? And so as you can actually go walk fields, you'll see these in the field. Now, believe it or not, I get called out to these all the time saying it's singulation. There's a skip in my field. There's a multiple. Okay, but if there's a skip followed by a multiple, that's not a singulation issue. That's a spacing issue. Okay, that skip should have been that multiple should have been right there. So it's the right amount of seeds, it's just not placed correctly. All right? And I can even tell you what direction that planter's running in the field. So in 2015, we solved that. We said we've got to get control of that seed release. And so we actually control the seed from the meter to the furrow. Now when we did that, that gave us the ability to, and it's in the name, right, speed, because speed sells. But the reality is now I can go at higher speeds because I couldn't before. Now I can get more acres done in less time. And that also gives me the ability to bring that planter to the field in the optimum planting window to get the best performance, right? What about singulation? How many of you have heard the term singulation? Okay. No one on planet Earth has done more study or research on singulation than precision planting. When we talk about singulation, that's meter accuracy, and it's typically comprised of skips and multiples. So at grower meetings, I typically ask my dealers to have the growers bring in a meter and let's test them on the stand and see where they run. And it's amazing the things that we find. So why does singulation matter? Why does meter accuracy make a difference? Well, anytime I say what's the value of it, let's put some dollars and bushels to it, okay? So for every 1% increase in singulation, that's a 2 to 4 bushel swing. So I'm going to peg that at 2.5 bushel, and I'm going to say every bushel in today's current market price, $4.46. If I can take your meter from 97, just a 2% improvement, to 99+%, that's 2 times 2.5 bushel, that's 5 bushel, easy math, times the current cash price, that's $20.30 per acre. Let's say it's on 500 acres, right? The more acres, the more return. $11,150 value, okay? And that's just from 97 to 99%. I still find meters that are running 92%, 95%. And we can get you with VSET 99.8 on average across 5 years, simply, right? And so that's where it makes a difference. And the reality is once you add these components, V-drive, VSET with speed tube, you no longer worry about singulation, spacing, or population. You've solved it, right? And so the end goal is, guess what? This is a solar farm that I can get behind, right? This is what a solar farm is. This is what it should look like. Every one of those plants is harvesting sunlight. So when you think about it like that, that's where spacing, population, and singulation matter in setting that crop up for success, right? And so we've summed that up. So now we're going to actually transition to kind of the foundation of the planter pass, and that's emergence. And so with that transition, we're going to actually transition to the 3 C's of emergence: clean, create, close. Now Ryan Howard's going to come in and he's going to clean up the next portion. Now I like to call him Dundee, and you'll see why. Thanks, Ryan.
Okay, so as Mike said, my name is Ryan Howard, and I am a product specialist here at Precision Planting. Mike also said my name is Dundee. That's a nickname that was coined to me. It seemed to stick for the last couple of years working here. I don't know why. If it doesn't make sense to you, maybe I'll speak a little bit and you'll think this bloke sounds a little funny and it'll start to click for you. But before we go into the 3 C's, I want to cover emergence. Okay, so what drives emergence? There's 3 things. We have air, we have moisture, and we have temperature. It's how we manage those 3 things that determines how even our emergence is. Okay, but what is the cost of emergence? So we wanted to find out what the cost of having late emerging plants in our fields were. So 10 years ago, we sent out research agronomists to figure this out. They went to 16 different states, 148 different fields, and did 7,200 different trials to determine what the cost of having late emerging plants in our fields were. And it didn't matter what of the 16 states they were in, if you were just 1 leaf collar behind, you were losing half an ear. If you had 2 leaf collars behind, congratulations, you've just paid for and planted a Roundup Ready weed. That is giving us nothing in return. So as we go through the clean, the create, and the close, it's vitally important that we set those systems up and manage those systems correctly so we don't have late emerging plants. One of the things that can hinder even emergence is residue. So we'll talk about row cleaners. Row cleaners are the first thing that engage with the furrow. It leaves the pathwork for success for the rest of the row unit. Why do we have them? Well, we want to have something that looks like this, a nice clean furrow or a nice clean path for us to create that furrow in. Why don't we want residue on top of the furrow? Well, something like this. We don't want a hairpin next to that seed. Why? Well, a couple of reasons, right? We take away that seed to soil contact by doing this. Okay, then we don't have all that residue can pull moisture away from the seed, which can drive late emergence, and we'll talk about seed to soil contact and that in a little bit. We can also have a temperature issue within that furrow, okay, as well as disease pressure later in the season. Now, I don't know what you see when you see this photo, late emerges, but what I think of is lost opportunity cost. We've got late emerges. We talked about the cost of late emerges. We're losing money in this photo. Now, I stand up here seeming pretty confident that residue causes late emerges. You might be wondering why. Well, I did work out at the PTI farm for a couple of years, and this was one of my projects, and I'll explain what you're seeing behind me. This is a plot that we planted. So we have our plot planter. We take the closing system off. We don't even plant any seed. One of the full-time guys sits in the planter, creates a planter pass, and then it was my job and my fellow intern's job to then go and plant a seed every 6 inches across that whole plot. To make it better, we then got a piece of residue and put it on top of that seed, flagged it. My hands became the closing system, closed it up, and see, hand harvest, and see what those late emergers did. So who wants to work for Jason Webster? No hands are up right now, okay? But as you see in the picture behind me, as we introduced more residue into that environment, those ears start to degrade. So it's important that our row cleaners get that residue out of the way so we don't have a situation like we have behind me. But I did want to take this a little bit of a different route this morning. Okay, so we know that residue, hairpin down, causes late emerges. But here at Precision Planting, we have the opportunity to go to you guys as farms, talk to you no matter where you're at in this country or around the world, and see what you're doing on your operation to make more money. One of the most common talking points over the last couple of years is early planted soybeans. Okay, early planted soybeans starts to increase the risk of frost. Okay, you might be wondering, why is Dundee up here talking about frost soybeans and residue managers? Well, think about thermal warming. Okay, if we do a good job with those residue managers, creating a nice, clean furrow for that sun to bake down on that soil, if we were to take a temperature reading where we had a good, clean environment versus where we took that residue away and took a temperature reading, where we had that clean environment, it'd be significantly warmer. But I want to take you through a quick little story. Okay, so as you see the circle around March, in 2021, we were able to plant soybeans on March 10th. Pretty early, okay? The next addition to the story comes Mother's Day. We're sitting in the pickup truck, and the weatherman comes on and says, bring your plants inside, we're going to have a frost. So Jason was in the truck, and he said, all right, boys, we're bringing our plants inside. So I'm like, oh, he's talking about the pot plants out the front of the shop. And he said, no, we are bringing our soybeans inside. So I laughed because I thought he was joking. If you know Jason, he was not joking. And when I play this next slide, you'll realize why the stock price of large plastic tarps went up drastically overnight. We covered our soybean plot with plastic tarps. We covered half. Why did we do that? We wanted to see what the difference would be if we did lose that plot to frost. At least we had that data to see what we would have had. Okay, a little bit more addition to the story. This is right along the interstate. So we got cars and semis honking their horns at us because we look pretty silly out there. Okay, another addition to the story, it was just above freezing. It was raining. For an Aussie like me, that is freezing cold. Okay, and the last addition to the story, it was 40-mile-an-hour winds that day. So if you use context clues, think about 40-mile-an-hour winds and tarps that don't mix well. Okay, we finally laid that final plastic tarp. The wind died right down. So if that's anything to tell you about what I'm going to tell you next, what was the difference between where we covered the beans and where we didn't? Nothing. All that effort for nothing. But why? Because we did a good job of getting that residue out of the way, so we had a clean strip. That thermal warming throughout the day was just enough to get us through that frost. Now, when we got off the strip and got into some residue, we lost those beans. So it just shows you how important it is with earlier planted soybeans getting that residue out of the way. You see a slide behind me. of multiple different tillage environments. Now, I know you guys, maybe who you're sitting next to, farm in different conditions, right? Different farms have different conditions, different fields have different conditions. This is a picture at PTI. I'm in the planter, okay? Before I came to PTI, the planter that I farmed with or planted with was completely ground drive, fixed row cleaners, spring downforce. When I started planting with PTI, one thing I noticed was when I turned around, I never saw those hex shafts spinning. We had electric drive. What I did notice was what my row cleaners were doing for the first time. I also had in-cab adjustability of those row cleaners, and I've never adjusted a row cleaner so much in my life. That row cleaner that we had on that planter was Reveal, which you can see right here. So we'll talk through it a little bit. It is a little bit different. One thing you may notice about it is the internal gauge wheel. That is holding up our blades and determining that blade depth. It's that gauge wheel, right? So right now we have it all the way up so that, let's say we're going through strip till, we can just knock the clods out. But let's say we need to get aggressive. We can pull that gauge wheel all the way up to allow those cleaning wheels to really get aggressive and move that residue. We talked about a gauge wheel, and we also have treaders. You know, treaders are usually meant for that flotation. So why do we have the gauge wheel treader combo? Well, what we noticed was as we start planting faster, we'd run the risk of throwing that residue into neighboring rows. The treader wheels are there to help deflect that residue down so we don't get it into that neighboring row. We also have a trailing design, so it folds back up into itself, gives a little bit of give if we need. How can it do that? Well, it's now bar mounted, okay? So something you may notice, we'll play this little animation behind me. And we'll play the animation here, and you can see that row unit mounted row cleaner is now taken off the bar or off the row unit and now put to the bar. Why did we do this? What we noticed was as that row cleaner starts hitting chunks of residue, clods, that vibration is being felt through the row unit and could be affecting that singulation and that spacing that we've worked so hard to achieve. I want to play this little video. Before I play the video, I want to tell you a little bit about the story behind the video. So we went to a grower. He had just replaced his row cleaners. Okay, so we're beta testing Reveal. You can tell that it's a beta test by the number 22, that yellow 22 on that framework. That means it's production number 22 of Reveal. Okay, so we asked him, could you try a couple? He just replaced all his row cleaners, but he said, sure, I'll try a couple. We've set a GoPro up on that planter, live streaming to an iPad in the cab. So I'm going to play this video, but what I want you to watch is on the right-hand side of your screen. Look at that row cleaner that's mounted to the row unit. Then watch how that row unit rides. So as you can see, we're bouncing that row cleaner quite a bit. In that row unit, you can see how much vibration it has in it. If you look to the left-hand side, you see Reveal to the bar. You can see it trailing a little bit in like that trailing design shows, but that row unit is riding smooth as. By moving that row cleaner off the row unit to the bar, we've been able to increase good ride and keep that good singulation spacing. I'm going to hand it back over to Mike now to cover Create.
Thanks, Ryan. He cleaned that up nicely, wouldn't you say? I like the way you did that. Well done, Dundee. All right, so now as we get into the create portion, right? We're talking create, furrow creation. We got to make sure everything is set up accurately before we're going to expect that planter to perform. Are we set up here? Yeah, for a train wreck, right? And that's the difference, right? We don't want to run into this. And you know how we find out about these? We have a grower that adds a new product of ours, and they say, hey, your downforce system's not working here, or your closing system's not working here. And that's when we come out and actually see it, and we say, hey, your whole system's not set up. It's not ready to go right now. Look at the angle. Look at the hitch height. It's not level at all, right? And so as we think about that, I want to make sure I have the correct bar height so that my row units are actually set. And you can look at the parallel arms there, that they're ready at that engagement height. And then at the same time, I actually want to come in and I want to come behind the bar, and I want to make sure, and this matters in the field. It doesn't matter in the shop where we are right now, but in the field, I want to make sure that this bar is level, maybe slightly uphill, but never nose down, okay? And because that bar, when we say it sets the bar for the row unit and the path of that row unit to perform the way it was designed. And then, of course, you also want to make sure that that works across the bar, that the bar is level across the bar. Because I was just talking to a grower after this last one where he said the wings tend to float up, right? And so that's a real challenge, and we want to make sure every row. As we talk about that, there's a lot of row-to-row variation. Now, this can be with planter maintenance, this can be with seeding, but there's a lot of variability row to row. So how many row planter do you have? Okay, whatever row planter you have, you need to think of it as, if in this case it's 16, you have 16 planters, okay? Because if one of those isn't performing, it isn't one, right? And so that's why we want to make sure that every row, because every row matters, and we've got to make sure that it is set up for success. And so the first stage of getting that set up is planter maintenance. How many of you have done your planter maintenance? Right? Is that something you do every now and then or every year? And I would say, well, how many times are you going to farm? You're going to farm every year? Okay, then it needs to be done every year, right? Because these components are things that you really can't tell if they're performing or not. And so that's really your way to validate that they're ready to go for the field and that that planter is ready to go for the field. Otherwise, you're not going to probably know until it's too late. Okay, and so here's the challenge. Okay, I don't have 3 hours in this session to do planter maintenance. So I'm going to actually take this load off of my shoulders and I'm going to put it on the experts, and that's our premier dealers. Now, our premier dealers, they typically offer planter clinics and they offer planter maintenance, and they're the ones that do that day to day. That's their daily job. And so as we think, reach out to them to help get your planter ready for Plant 25. Also, we do have a maintenance guide that you can download to kind of give you some step-by-step and see what all we recommend. Okay. So as we talk about furrow creation, let's start with depth. How deep do you plant corn? I'm asking. Oh, bingo. How deep? Okay, so let's look. Here's a study. We went at different depths, 1 inch to 3.5 inch every half inch, right? And then we did this in 6 different locations, right? Because typically we hear you only have central Illinois data. So there's 6 different locations. This is crop tour data, by the way. And then what I did is I came in and I highlighted where the highest yielding depths were, okay? And what did you find? Okay, now typically I'd say, I hear the growers say 2 inches, I planted 2 inch, maybe 2.5 in the last group, right? But what we're admitting here is that there's variability, right? And so if there's variability of where I should plant depth-wise, what's the cost to that? Okay, so let's kind of calculate that. If I was a ½ inch shallower, just the next stage up from where my highest yielding optimum depth was, that's just shy of 9 bushel, which is about $31 per acre. Is there value in making changes there, right? So as we think about that, here's the other challenge. Where is the moisture? You said moisture. Where is it at? Right? And I have to have that visibility. Otherwise, how do I know? How often do you dig? Can you dig enough? Right? So here's a scenario. In this field, I've got sand, I've got clays. All of those soil types hold moisture differently, right? And as I'm going through that field, now I have the visibility. So here's a scenario where we planted at 2 inch across that field. What do I see? Variability. There's areas where there's plenty of moisture, and there's areas where there's not. Okay, so that's a challenge. So let's look at some more studies. Again, now that we have Smart Firmer to show us where the moisture is, we can go into different conditions and different fields and know what we have available. And maybe that'll challenge why we do what we do. So in this case, we're going to look at optimal soils first, and we did the same thing. We planted at different depths, and then you can see the yield potential on the left there. As we look at this, we are hunting for that furrow moisture line. So that 30% furrow moisture is a line that we've basically said that's what the seed needs to imbibe across a 3-day weight gain, right, as we're imbibing moisture. And so that's what we need for consistent emergence or germination, right, which correlates to emergence. So where's the moisture in optimal soils? Well, let's look. It's relatively available in this field on this day, right? And that changes from day to day, maybe. What about loose soils? Where do you think the moisture is in loose soils? Deeper, thank you. Somebody said it. There we go, deeper. That's what I'm looking for. So in this case, it was deeper than 2.5, so about 2 3/4. Now I've got some growers that say, well, I won't plant 3 inches. Well, then I would say, then don't plant that field that day, right? That's the challenge. So in this case, on that field, on that day, 2 3/4 is where the moisture was, right? So if I said I planted all my acres at 2 inches, that's an 18 bushel loss. Starting to make sense here, right? Okay, so then what about tighter soils? What about in those clays? Where do you think the moisture is? Well, I talk to these guys and they say, well, I've got moisture everywhere, okay? And so when we look here, yeah, it's available in those tighter soils that hold moisture as long as they've had moisture, right? It's there, it's available. So at that point, am I going to plant corn at 1 inch? No, no, right? But what if I shallowed it up from 2 inch to 1.5 inches or 1 3/4? 10 bushel difference. Is this challenging that 2 inches is where I set it and forget it? Should I set it and forget it? Well, again, it comes back to if you don't know, how do you know? And that's the challenge. Okay, so then let's talk about what's important with emergence. Is uniform emergence driven more by consistent depth or sufficient moisture? You already said it. Said moisture. Uniform emergence starts with uniform germination. So what do we need for germination? Moisture and temperature, typically. Not a specific depth. It's moisture, like you said. Perfect. So out of all of our research and our studies, this is our recommendations. Plant at 1.5 inches or deeper, and then hunt for that 30% furrow moisture. That's the sufficient moisture line that we need. Okay? So that's easy, right? If I've got a flashlight shining the light on the issue, or I know how much moisture I have in the field, it's easier, right? It's not. Because you still have to make adjustments. And if we talked and you said you had 16 row units, you're making that adjustment across 16 rows. How many of you change your depth throughout the field? Very few people will change the depth. Because here's the thing, I walk behind planters and I see that T-handle, and there's some planters that it looks like it is welded in place. What does that mean? It's never been moved. You know why? And I understand it, but it's not the right reason, is because the second you move that T-handle, you just admitted there's variability and there's value in making changes. And now you just admitted, well, your job's not to plant now, it's to go and change depth all the time through the field. Right? And that's the challenge. But what did I say that we do here at Precision Planting? We give you the information and then we simplify, right? And so the information that tells you where the moisture is Smart Firmer. The way that we simplify the process of changing your depth is Smart Depth. So again, with Smart Firmer, we're getting our moisture in the cab. I have the ability, so with Smart Depth, we actually calibrate and zero every row's depth. And then from the cab, you can change depth on the fly. How many of you would do that? What if I make it even easier? And you have a lot of variability in your field, and I say, hey, here's an easy button. We've got moisture-based agronomy control here, where I can come in as a grower, as the operator. You can come in and set your minimum depth. You set your maximum depth, so you're setting the guardrails. And then because of Smart Firmers telling us where the moisture is, we can actually hunt for that 30% as I go through the field. Not really worried about it at all. Simplifies it, right? So row-to-row uniformity gives us in-cab adjustability with moisture-based agronomy. So as we talk about emergence, I cannot not mention the Keaton Seed Firmer. Who's in here running a Keaton Seed Firmer? Okay, this is the product, this is the first product of Precision Planting back in 1993, okay? The Keaton Seed Firmer. How many of you have run a Keaton Seed Firmer for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? If you're running the same Keaton for 5 years and 10 years, it's no longer a seed firmer, okay, because it's not actually touching the seed product, it's wore out. These do need to be replaced. But the idea is, it's kind of what I've called an insurance policy. We're just putting about 20 to 30 ounces of pressure on top of the seed just to get that seed down to the bottom of the furrow. What's at the bottom of the furrow that we want it to be at? Consistent depth and moisture. Yeah, hopefully if we're at the right depth, we have moisture there, right? And so typically we see about 6 bushel more per acre. This is still one of our highest ROI products, but you're going to get a more earlier and a more even emergence. Real simple. So then as we talk about depth, downforce is the force that we utilize to maintain our depth, okay? So whatever that is, typically there's 3 different systems that are out there. You've got your springs, your airbags, your hydraulic. Every one of these is adjustable. Doesn't mean we like adjusting the springs, but so what is the purpose? Well, downforce is kind of a double-edged sword. We kind of have the option to carry not enough, right? And if I don't carry enough, what happens? Typically shallow planted seeding depth, which correlates to late emergers because I don't have the moisture there, right? Or I lean on the other side and said, I do not want shallow planted seed, so what am I going to do? Lean on the other side there, and I'm going to carry more weight, maybe extra weight, kind of like an insurance policy, but then I'm creating compaction depending on conditions, and I'm putting all the extra load or that extra weight carried on the row unit on the gauge wheel, compacts the sidewall. The root always chooses the path of least resistance. Then on top of that, I'm possibly creating slotting where I need a pretty regular rain to keep my trench closed. So where do I lean towards? The goal is to hit it right in the middle, the sweet spot, right? Just right. And that Goldilocks line, just right. So why is this so challenging? Well, because of all the variables that come into play. What are the variables that constantly change as we're going through the field? There's many of them. There's the weight on the row unit. So that could be your seed box from full to empty. Insecticide. Soil type as I'm going through the field, clays, sands. If I change my planting depth, the moisture in the field typically doesn't take as much downforce, right? And then my speed. If I set everything up at 5 miles an hour, but then I go 6 because there's a storm coming, it's going to start to ride out. And then tillage practices. So all of these are things that are challenging, right? So what is good downforce? Good downforce is applying the right amount of weight needed to get the seed to depth without adding compaction. That's the goal. And so when we actually measure row by row, so if I put a load cell in every row, and you can see I took 1 second of time through that planter pass. Is there variability row to row? There is, right? And so if we admit that there's variability row to row, then there's going to be value in managing that variability, right? And so in 2014, we came out with Delta Force, where we're reading and controlling on every single row. And it's not just downforce, it's also lift, because some of those variables we mentioned is too much weight, right, which is creating compaction. So it actually can lift as well. So how does that work? Well, typically when I look at a field, I'm looking for variability. Now this is a downforce map. Your downforce map, if you look at it, is a result of how well you manage your downforce system. So in this case, is there much variability? I would say no. But what did it actually have to apply? So this is what Delta Force had to apply to get rid of or manage that variability. So in the pinks and purple regions, you can see those are that's softer ground where it actually had to lift around 100 to 150 pounds of weight off of all the rows as it occurred. And then in the other areas, we're ranging from around 200 to 300 pounds of downforce as we need, again. So as we look at that, variability managed with Delta Force. So as we wrap up that create section, I'm going to hand it back to Ryan, who's going to come from down under, and he's going to close us up.
It's nice to not be upside down for once. Thanks, Mike. So as we go through the close, it's the final system on our row unit to touch the furrow. And the job of the closing system becomes just that much easier when we have properly managed the create and the clean up front. But what's the goal of the closing system? Really, we have 2 jobs. One job, get rid of the sidewall compaction that our opening discs are creating when we're planting. And 2, press out that air pocket, reset that soil density layer, and retain moisture. So those are the two goals of closing. Ideally, we're trying to get this perfect balancing act between the moisture in the air within that soil profile. But what does it look like when we start to swing one way? We have too much air within that soil profile. As you can see behind me, we've got that air pocket above that seed. Okay, so it's not surrounded by soil anymore. We're going to have a late emerger because of that. Not only that, let's say we do have seed to soil contact around, but we don't really reset that density layer. We run the risk of drying out too quick or quicker than what we should. If we swing it the other way, maybe too much moisture, might look something like this. Now, I know this is drastic. We obviously planted this wet. Our closing system then grabbed that compaction layer that we created, two bricks together. We're going to have root development issues, or even worse, if it's severe enough, that plant can't push through that compaction layer. We're going to have a late emerger because of that as well. What does it look like when we have it just right, that nice balance? That seed perfectly tucked into that soil, good seed to soil contact around that seed, driving quick emergence. But I'll ask you guys a question. How do you track closing system emergence on your farm? Do you do it? Here at Tremont and research farms here at Precision Planting, we do 12-hour flag testing emergence to see how our closing systems are performing. So when I say 12-hour emergence, I'm not talking about the first 12 hours from when that planter leaves the field. We wait until that first plant pokes its head up out of the ground. We'll start our clock. We'll come back 12 hours later and flag every single plant that has emerged with a certain color flag. We'll come back in 12-hour time increments with a different color flag, track our emergence. We'll grab all that information, and we'll see what our emergence scores were for each different closing system. On top of that, we then go and we hand harvest every single flag that you saw behind me. That was just a small stretch. We do a lot of flag testing at PTI. As you can see me there, I'm down there. We're hand harvesting, hand shelling, hand weighing, and seeing what that emergence score turns out to be in yield. And as you can see behind me, we've got a loader bucket full. I'm pretty sure this is the 4th or 5th loader bucket we had full that year, and we still had corn on the ground. So not my favorite job at the PTI farm, but what did it give us? It gave us multiple years of data on closing system emergence and what the cost is of missing that optimum first 12-hour window. So we can't beat 12 hours, right? So once we go past that first 12 hours, that optimum window to 24 hours, we're losing 8% of yield over multiple years of data. You go just 12 hours later at 36 hours, losing about 30% of yield. You push that back 12 hours, 48 hours, we lose about 70%. And at 48 hours plus, we're losing 80% of yield. So it's vitally important that we assess our closing system when we're planning so that we don't have a large window of late emergers. How do we ensure that we are pushing as many 12 hours into that first optimum 12? The view from the cab, it's comfortable, but it doesn't really tell us much. From the ground, it can look good, but it could hide. I've been clicking the back button, I apologize. But from the ground, it could look something like this. Okay, we find that air pocket above that seed. We might have to go back and adjust that closing system now, drop it down one notch, be more aggressive to be able to press that air pocket out and hopefully get what we have on that right-hand side. If we don't get out and we don't dig, we might have something like this, right? A late emerge plant. At this point, there's one thing we can do, and that's watch for that ear to feel no grain, and we'll have a late emerger and a loss because of it. But I want to take you back to this slide. So like I said, we do lots of different closing system trials at the PTI farm. A closing system that we found to have more accurate 12-hour emergence or quicker emergence over the whole was with FurrowForce. Okay, so two-stage automated system. FurrowForce is 2 stages and has 2 jobs, okay, like any other closing system. But because it's 2 stages, we split those jobs across each stage. So the first stage, those 2 dual discs, those concave discs, one job only, get rid of that sidewall compaction. We lift and we fracture that sidewall and act like we were never there. We get rid of that compaction layer. The second stage is to come through and press out that air pocket, reset that soil density layer, and retain moisture. I want to take you through a little story about my first time planting with FurrowForce. Okay. So we start planting at the plot site there where we have a plot on the outside rows. That is our buffer because it's harvesting more sunlight. It's an unfair trial. So that's our chance to set this system up for success. So Jason's planning. He tells me to get out of the cab and dig and see how our closing system is performing. So I dig behind row 1. Well, I go to row 2 and I start digging, try to make sure I'm lined up with the row still. I go to row 3 and I still haven't found any seed. So I got 3 options. I can tell a guy that's been farming his whole life he's not planting any seed. 2, I tell him I haven't found any seed. Or 3, mind you, I'm relatively new, I think 2 months in at the time, it looks good. So as a new employee, a good employee, I told him it looks good. And I knew it was a stitch up at that point because the brake lights came on in the cab and he come running out. He says, Dundee, you haven't found any seed. I know. Well, he helped me dig. We did find seed. Luckily, I didn't tell him he wasn't planting any seed because he was. But what I was used to was getting out of that ground drive planter, that spring planter, finding that sidewall compaction and finding the seed. FurrowForce opened my mind up to how a closing system should perform. It is a little bit more strenuous on the digging, but it does a good job. I'll play this video now. Behind me, you can see the front stage of FurrowForce lifting and fracturing that sidewall compaction. And that second stage comes through, resetting that soil density layer. We can add a load cell and an airbag. We can set a target in the cab. And as we go through the field, we can adjust and maintain the target that you set. Hopefully, having more uniform conditions for that plant to push up through. When we were trying to figure out what the cost of Emergence was, we studied many different row cleaners, many different furrow engaging tools, as well as closing systems. We found agronomics with each of those, and as you can see, we came out with products to fix those issues. We also studied many different row units at that time, and I'm going to hand it over to Tim Schwind to cover that in more detail.
So as Ryan said, I'm Tim Schwind, one of the product managers here at Precision Planting. And as he said, we've done a lot of research of row units over the years. And what you see behind me up here on screen is actually a portion of our what we call our row unit library. And so that was actually taken just behind you here, all those set up. And what we've realized, they've all got a weak spot. So we've done a lot of these Emergence plots and trials. We've put these row units side by side. That's led us some product development like we covered today, like DeltaForce, V-Drive, or FurrowForce, and Reveal. But they all had a weak spot, and we kept asking ourselves, what does it take to make the perfect row unit? When you put together all your list of priorities and constraints, you put those in your CAD software, it looks something like this, just a mess. Where do you start? You've got infinite options, infinite possibilities. Well, we start with the basics, like we talked about here. We want to clean, we want to create, we want to close the furrow every time. In our design philosophy here at Precision Planting, we want our products to be easy to use, easy to service, and easy to customize so they fit your operation. So last year at Winter Conference, we unveiled the CornerStone Planting System. And this is really the culmination of decades of research, product development, and agronomy, all condensed into one planting system that we believe is the best one on earth. And I want to go through now and talk about how we start the 3 C's of emergence and clean the furrow. And as you might expect, we've built CornerStone to be fully integrated with Reveal. That's our getting that row cleaner off of the row unit itself onto the toolbar to avoid having any of those negative G-forces impact the row unit ride, helping us achieve good spacing. But we're also compatible with most row unit mounted cleaners that are on the market as well. So customized to fit your operation, but either way, we want to make sure that where the row unit rides, we've got the residue and debris cleared out of the way. So let's talk now about how do we create the furrow with CornerStone. So as you might expect, we've got double disc openers. They're 15-inch discs. They're married straight up. They're 3.5mm blades with heavy-duty cast hubs, so we're not worried about blade failures or bearing failures here. They are tilted just a little bit down, and that's to avoid creating a W-bottom furrow, so we can get the seed right to the bottom of the trench like Mike talked about. And it's built around our DeltaForce system. So that's row by row, not section or planter-wide hydraulic downforce control. So as you see, as the load pushes on the bottom of the gauge wheel, that rotates through the pivot, pulls on our load cell you see highlighted in green. So that sends a signal up to the SRM, our single row module. which then communicates with the delta force cylinder, telling it how much load we need to apply or remove from the row unit so we can keep the disc cutting the proper seed trench depth and keep the right amount of weight on the sidewall to avoid any unnecessary compaction. You also notice the trailing gauge wheel arms, and that is just one small benefit of CornerStone, so we can pull over rocks, pivot tracks, anything in the field. And as we dive a little more into those trailing arms, another benefit is because of the draft angle of the disc, they're at that 12-degree angle, they tend to stay snugged up against the opener disc themselves. So that just keeps things a little bit more easy to adjust, keep everything turning as it rolls through the field. But we also still need to be able to shim those. We can't just hope and pray that they're at the right contact angle. So we need to make sure we can adjust them. So we've got an easy-to-use adjustment bolt on the top of the gauge wheel arm, a quick clamp bolt. Just loosen that nut, slide the arm in or out to contact the disc, tighten it back up, and away you go. We've also included a hardened wear bushing on the top of the gauge wheel arm, trying to minimize the amount of wear points that are on the depth linkage system. So it's really just that crossbar yoke you see at the top that's the main wear point on this depth linkage. And Mike took us through a little bit talking about the importance of even emergence, and we want to talk about depth calibration on CornerStone. As you can see here, we've got an emergence issue. This row just didn't come up out of the ground. And the reason why it wasn't planted at that moisture line, it was actually planted it was 5/8 of an inch shallower than the neighboring rows, even though the T-handle all across this planter was set to 2 inches. So what's the reason? It wasn't actually planting 2 inches deep. We need to do a depth calibration and actually figure out what is the depth that row is planting at. So on CornerStone, we made this easy. So simply put the row unit on a set of blocks. In this case, I showed a couple of, this is easy to do in CAD. It's a little harder in real life, but 1.5 inch 2x4. So set your T-handle to that 1.5 inch position. Set the row unit up on the blocks. Then you can, by using the depth adjustment nut on the front of the linkage, you can draw that linkage tight so that you can have confidence that that T-handle is actually set to 1.5 inches of depth so that you can adjust each of your 12, 16, 24 rows to the same exact depth without pulling out any paint pens or trying to remember is it 4 and 5, 5 and 6, so we have confidence in the depth that we're planting. And then whether it's high speed or conventional, CornerStone is built around the VSET2 and V-Drive metering system. So that's what Mike talked about, the importance of getting the right population, right singulation, right spacing every time. So whether you're planting with speed tube or wave vision, that's the planting system, or that's the metering system on CornerStone. And so now once we've dropped the seed in the trench, we want to close it up like we were never even there. So Ryan took us through furrow force. On CornerStone, we're actually taking furrow force to the next level. So we've actually completely redesigned this system. So now we have a little bit extra frame clearance, and what that does is improve rock and residue flow through the closing system. We still have the same 2-stage approach, so we've got the second stage packing wheels to press the air out. We've got an optional load cell so that you can measure and then automatically control the closing performance on your planter. But new for this year, we also are offering it as a single stage option with 13-inch wheels, so we're compatible with most closing wheels on the market today. And just to briefly recap that, whether it's single stage or fully automatic furrow force, this is customizable, configurable, built for CornerStone, and it's easy to make an upgrade in the future if you so choose. It's easy to adjust like I showed on screen, so here's an example of that easy adjustment, keeping that closing tail aligned with your row unit. So instead of having a couple of bushings on either side of the row unit itself to adjust, it's just one nut up on top. Swing that closing frame into position, and then tighten it down to make sure we're closing that furrow each and every time. Okay, so we've cleaned, created, and closed the furrow, but there's still a couple of features we haven't talked about yet. First one is the rear tipping hopper. And as a design engineer, I didn't have a lot of understanding of the significance of this. But whether that's the mini hopper, the 1.6 bushel, or the 3 bushel, they're all designed around VSET tube meter. They're all MSET compatible. And hopefully they help you avoid throwing out your back if you ever have to pull one of these off when it's full. So we got the integrated slide gate so you can shut that seed pool off. And then rather than talk about it, I want to show it to you. So if you move over to this 3-row planter here we have on this harvest bar, we got each of the hoppers up here so you can play with it if you'd like to. But just pull the latch here, tip the hopper back, and then slam it back home when you're done. That makes it really easy to get the meter off if you have change a crop kit, or if you have any sort of, maybe you left a seed bag string in the hopper or somewhere and it got caught up in the meter. Really easy to get in there and adjust. The other feature I like is the integrated harness routing. So what we've done is we've opened up the back of the row unit. Because of those trailing gauge wheel arms, we have some extra room to what we've colloquially termed the glove box. And if I show you the harness here, you'll see how we've taken all the can jumpers, the can expansion hubs, and put that all into one harness, and then tucked it right into the row unit itself. So that keeps it out of the way of your sunflower, corn stalks, any residue or debris that's in the field itself. There's also plenty of room for air lines, liquid lines, and a lot of zip tie locations so we keep all that stuff tied down and out of harm's way. So CornerStone, it's not just another chassis of opener discs and seed tube to drop seed in the ground. It's built from the ground up with attention to every detail, designed to clean, create, and close the perfect furrow every time, and to give you, our customers, the flexibility to order the way you want it, to configure it and upgrade it to fit your operation. So whether that's with DeltaForce and V-Drive, or you're using MSET, Speed2, Smart Depth, Smart Firmer, Conceal, and 3 liquid systems, CornerStone is a planting system designed for you. I want to take you through a quick example of what it might look like to do a CornerStone install. So in this time lapse here, you're seeing one of our local dealers. They're just north of here on Route 9 in Tremont. So they're taking the old row unit off. They're pulling CornerStone out of the crate that it ships in. They're U-bolting it up to the toolbar, and then they're going to install the meter. They're going to install the closing system, plug in the row harness, and away you go. I do have to caution you, though, it does take a little bit longer than this just to do the install. But if you cut your, or take the attention to the stage right here, you'll actually see the planter that's in the video that we're showing. This is a John Deere 7200. It's about 30 years old. So we took this planter down to the bar, and if you look at it, it is a clean machine. It is factory, showroom ready practically. The bar's in great shape, hydraulics are in great shape, tires are in great shape. So rather than taking that to the scrapper or making it a trade-in towards a brand new machine and spending those hundreds of thousands of dollars, this customer has chosen to move those products over the Reveal furrow force onto the CornerStone and get that brand new planter performance without that brand new planter price tag. So I invite you to come take a look up there after this presentation if you'd like to. So just to recap where we've been today, Mike started us off going through the yield priority pyramid, talking through emergence, population, singulation, spacing. Then Mike and Ryan took us through the 3 C's of emergence: cleaning, creating, and closing. And I showed how those have all, with all of our research and development, have culminated in the CornerStone Planting System. So this session on the priorities of the planter pass was just the first step in getting ready for Plant 2025. You should look for a planter clinic or a grower meeting near you. Contact your local precision planting premier dealer. Talk to one of us in the gray shirts, or text in your question here if you have any more questions.